and everybody knows their advice monster. As soon as something starts happening, their advice monster kind of looms up out of the darkness and goes, "Oh, I'm going to add some serious value to this thing. I can't wait for you to stop talking because I already know what I want to tell you."
Hey, welcome to the Rare Mind Podcast, a new thing where I, Alex M.H. Smith, the author of No Bullshit Strategy, explore the outlier behaviors that produce outlier results. And today we're going to speak to the man who has perhaps done more than anyone alive to change how leaders talk to their people. The author of the best-selling coaching book of the last 20 years, maybe pushing ever, Michael Bungay Stanier. So spookily, I've just been informed by our guest today that this might be the third Toronto resident I've had on the podcast in a row. I don't know what is going on in Toronto. I don't know what they put in the water there, but at least this man himself is not Canadian. He's Australian. It is MBS, not Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Hopefully he'll be on next week.
No, it's Michael... the same. I run Saudi Arabia. It's a side hustle. I mean, it's going really well right now.
You are the same person. I mean, I've never seen the two of you in the same room at the same time. So
exactly.
That does make
sense.
No, of course, I'm talking about Michael Bungay Stanier, author. Well, how can we put this? I suppose that if you had to boil it down to one word, I guess we would say that you're a coach, but not just any coach. The author of what is maybe... Would I be right in saying perhaps the number one selling coaching book in history, or definitely in the mix there anyway?
I think so. I mean, I definitely the author of The Coaching Habit. Definitely that's the best selling book on coaching of the last 20 years or so. So possibly of history. Funnily enough, not actually a coach. Like I don't actually have a coaching practice. But I'm a teacher and an advocate for the power of coaching. I've been a coach. But it turns out that even though I thought all roads were leading to me becoming a coach, once I started that business, it didn't actually light me up in the way that I hoped it would. I realized I prefer teaching. I like performing. I like trying to play a bigger game, have more impact than I think coaches individually can do. So I broke my coaching practice down, but went into writing about it and teaching people about it.
Oh, I mean, I can empathize with that on the basis that I suppose I prefer pontificating about strategy to actually doing strategy. So I can definitely relate. But how does that even happen? Because one would think that in order to have such authority to be able to write the books that you have, of which Coaching Habit is just one, you would need to have 30 years of deep trench coaching warfare under your belt. Did you not find that?
More important was figuring out who I wanted to serve and what problem I wanted to solve, and approach it in that way. The challenge I thought with all the coaching books beforehand is they were written by people who were obsessed about coaching, and they were long and they were boring and they were technical and they were jargony, and I knew who I wanted to help. I wanted to help managers and leaders in companies. And the job before, one of my earlier jobs was in the world of innovation and creativity. So I would run focus groups with people and ask them how they felt about soup and credit cards and whiskey and pizza, trying to figure out what were they happy with, what were they unhappy with, and then trying to come up with solutions and products and services that they might be interested in buying. And I think that really served me well, because I was like, I think I know who I'm trying to serve here. This is a busy manager and leader. She likes her job. She quite likes her team. She's a bit burnt out, and she's a bit stuck with how to help that team perform better. And she's become the bottleneck in her own team. And so I knew I had to write a book that unweirded coaching. I know I needed to write a book that was short and readable. I figured it was my ideal person was a woman. So it's like I wanted to write a book that would fit in somebody's handbag, so that when she picked it up in the airport, she could go, look, I can read most of this book on the flight home, and it fits. It's not a big, scary book. It's not heavy. It's not thousands and thousands of words. So honestly, it was more about being strategic about going, what's the market? What's the common thing? Where's the blue ocean here? Who do I serve? and then my technical expertise around coaching, which I did have some. I trained as a coach. I was a coach. I taught coaching. And that came into play kind of as the third part of the equation, not as the first part.
Fascinating. And of course, that particular book, its whole sort of USP, if I'm getting it right, is that it is kind of a coaching manual for people who are not coaches by training. I'm sure that tons of professional coaches have gotten a lot out of it, but really you didn't write that for the coach. As you say, you wrote it for leaders. And I suppose I can relate to that a lot as well, because in much a similar way, I suppose you'd probably say that, broadly speaking, the most important coaching that goes on out there in the world, or certainly the most frequent, is the unofficial coaching not done by coaches. Much as we might say that the most meaningful strategic thinking and strategy work is not done by anyone with the name strategist in their title. It is done by people who were in positions of responsibility to actually do things.
I've come to realize it's the bleedingly obvious when you hear it, but it took me a while to get there, which is people want to be seen and heard and encouraged. That is at the human interaction level, that's what people are after. I want to be seen, to be heard, and to be encouraged. And being more coach-like, I'm not teaching people how to be a coach. I'm teaching them how to be more coach-like, which the way I would define that is, can they just stay curious a little bit longer, and can they rush to action and advice giving a bit more slowly? It turns out being more coach-like is just one of the most powerful ways of doing that. And this applies if you're a parent, if you're a co-founder, if you're a boss, if you're a manager, if you're an individual contributor, if you interact with other human beings, the ability to be curious about them and to be curious about the issue at hand, it turns out to be a really powerful way of showing up in the world.
Well, I mean, I profoundly agree with the curiosity point, but let me dive straight into a bone that I have to pick with you. That would probably be saying too much, but it's something that I've noticed where perhaps our two shticks, on the face of it, diverge a bit, but probably normally when you talk these things out, they tend to resolve. So one thing that I found through my career, and I think I have actually overplayed this, so I'm starting to come around to more to your point of view now. But I didn't
even have to do anything, and I'm already convinced.
I know. This is the power of the coaching. Oh my God, it's happening to me right now. I still do believe that a lot of people, most people, they really crave being told what to do. People, we have this. Think about it in the world of, let's say, in my world, in sort of strategy development. The common wisdom would be something like, oh, you want to make it very collaborative and, and sort of ask everyone's opinion, But in my experience, and of course, everyone would say that they want that if you ask them. But in my experience, people love to have all the responsibility removed from their shoulders and to just have someone come in who's just got such a firm direction and idea. That person just says, right, I just want you to do this. And everybody just breathes a collective sigh of relief.
Yeah.
So how does that? So I do think that in various contexts that is true. So how does that align with your, on the face of it, opposite idea of not rushing around giving people advice and telling them what to do?
Yeah. Look, I think it's clear that you're just wrong.
No. That's a simple answer. I like it.
No. There's an article by Daniel Goleman, Harvard Business Review, year 2000, I think. It's called Leadership That Gets Results. And he says, look, there are 6 different styles of leadership. They all have their prizes and punishments, their pros and their cons to them. They're all appropriate in certain circumstances and contexts.
Right.
They also don't work in other contexts. And Goleman's finding, and Goleman became famous for kind of popularizing the whole idea of emotional intelligence, but this was a little bit before this. He says, look, typical leaders are good at 1 or 2 or maybe 3 of these different styles of leadership. Great leaders know the appropriate style in the appropriate moment, because there are clearly moments where you don't want to be asking a question, you want to be giving a direction. If the house is burning down, you don't go, hey man, how do you feel about smoke? You go, follow me, we're leaving by the exit. So first of all, there's that, which is coaching is an underutilized form of leadership. And Goldman says as much. He says, look, part of it's too hard, it takes too much time, people don't use this as much, even though it's been shown to have a real impact on both culture and bottom line profitability. Part of my philosophy is to make coaching easy so you can do it quickly and therefore overcome one of those key objections. But if all you do is coach as a leader, you will fail. Because part of being a leader is actually having moments where you're like, it's my decision to make. I'm making this decision now. I'm giving direction in this context. So that's the first part of the answer. There's a second part of the answer, which is it's hard to be a grown-up. And it's hard to adult. And I think a lot of us love that moment where we can go, oh, I can give up responsibility here because I've just, hand it over to somebody else who's willing to take that on. And at a deeper level in my work, part of what I'm asking people to do is to build adult-to-adult relationships. And an adult-to-adult relationship is like knowing that you've got a choice, making a choice, asking for what you want, knowing that the answer might be no, and then negotiating the difference. But here's the thing. When you make a choice, two emotions show up, guilt and anxiety. There's anxiety around, have I made the right choice? And there's guilt about closing the door on the options that you're actually saying no to. This was taught to me by a guy called Peter Block. And so with the rewards that comes with being an adult and taking responsibility, come that price you pay, which is like holding guilt and anxiety. So there is a part of us, all of us, that go, and it'd just be so much better if somebody else just sorted this out for us, and sorted out for me. But part of the call, I think, is to have people step up and take responsibility for their own freedom.
That's fascinating. Do you think that it is, if we assume then that any given leader has got these different styles and different capabilities, and we're trying to move them into this sort of adult to adult frame,
Mm-hmm.
is the best way of doing that, typically speaking, that the individual leader expands their range of abilities themselves, or do we take the position that people's natural abilities kind of are what they are, and they just bring on other people to fill in the gaps?
I'd probably be trying for the first option rather than the second option. I think the second option is an interesting one, and in general, really smart in terms of more broad leadership capacities. Like, for instance, in the companies that I'm part of, I'm really good at the visioning side of things. I'm really good at the creating side of things. I'm okay at the marketing side of things. I'm not very good at the sales side of things. I'm shocking at the operations side of things. And it's really clear that it's an utter waste of my time to try and build my operations muscle and move from thoroughly mediocre to mostly mediocre. That's where I need to build a team around me to say, actually, this is where you need to hold the line and be the champion, and this is what you're going to be doing. And in fact, it's this is a bit of an aside, but I think one of the things you learn as you grow a company is, in some ways, the founder's strength often becomes the company's weakness, because the founder is most reluctant to let go of the things she is best at. But at a certain point, the company has evolved, and the founder has to hire somebody better than her in whatever that discipline is. And that's a threat to the ego, and it's hard to find because the founder's actually pretty good at it. But it actually becomes the thing that the founder holds on to becomes the blind spot to the company. So I think in general, in terms of capacities that are required to run a company, you want to be hiring people around you to build that. But I think the work of leadership is an internal piece, and there you want to be building out your own capacity to say, look, I need to recognize that sometimes I need to be directive, and I need to be assertive, and I need to say, this is my responsibility, this is my choice, and this is the decision I'm making. There's other times where you need to be more collaborative. You go, look, I'm going to actually figure out and hear from everybody, and then collectively I'm going to facilitate a vote on this. Occasionally it's like I'm going to hear from everybody, but the responsibility for this decision still rests on me. Sometimes it's coaching, and then sometimes it's the other 2 styles of leadership I can't remember right now. But there's a way to go, what's the context, and what does this context ask of me as a leader right now?
Yeah, it makes me reflect that obviously the scenarios that I see are very self-selecting. The type of people who would contact me and the type of companies that I would go into, you see the same pattern again and again and again, which is obviously the pattern that has sort of prompted the engagement in some senses. So it's tempting for someone like me to think, oh, well, this must just be how every company is inside. But actually, I'm not seeing the 95% of cases where the dynamics are totally different.
I've got a tool for people that might be helpful. It's one I use in my companies. So I have 3 small companies that I am nominally the CEO of, but honestly, I'm a pretty terrible CEO. So I'm really a figurehead, and other people are running the companies, and I try and stay my little part of it to do my bit. But we use a decision-making tree. And this comes from a writer called Susan Scott, who wrote a book called Fierce Conversations. And it uses the metaphor of a tree. So a tree has twigs, branches, a trunk, and roots. And so for Box of Crayons, which is my training company, they train the IP of the coaching habit and the advice trap in Fortune 1000 companies. The CEO of that company is Shannon. Now, twig decisions are decisions I'm never even going to hear about. Like, they're just never going to come to me as the owner and board member and the person that Shannon, the CEO, reports to. Branch decisions I'm going to hear about when I read her monthly update to the company. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. They did this. Oh, they closed this deal. Oh, they fired this person. Trunk decisions are the ones that she comes to me to talk about, but it's her decision to make. So this is typically at the moment for us, like hiring into the exec team, the leadership team. It would be capital expenses over a certain amount. Should we do this? It might be some of the big partnership conversations. And then the root decisions are the decisions for me to make and the decisions that I have to take responsibility for. Now, this is fluid. We keep updating this, but at the moment, for instance, I only have 2 root decisions for Box of Crayons. Do I sell the company or not? And do I fire Shannon or not? And that's it. That's all I get to decide. So when Shannon does things that I'm like, oh man, this is my company. I started this company 24 years ago, almost to the day, July 4th, 2002, I started the company. So 24 years ago, and the founder's DNA is in everything. So now when she changes this and changes that, there's part of me that goes, oh, sad face. But part of me goes, hey, this is what it means to devolve responsibility and to get clear on what decisions I have as a leader in a certain context.
Well, so that idea of devolving responsibility. So this is very pertinent to the strategy stuff that I see. And one of the things that obviously I think dramatically holds businesses back from making the kind of moves that I try to get them to make is that obviously, to use the tree analogy, if the leader is spending all their time in the twigs, they're never thinking about the roots in the first place, right? The roots, actually, they're too far down the list of like urgent priorities to ever get addressed, and hence why most businesses are completely reactive and meandering. So how if I'm in that situation where perhaps I'm having to think about so many sort of piddling things all the time, and I'm having to micromanage my team and hold the hand of my team all the time.
Yeah.
What exactly is the trick, the secret to actually getting your team to not only be self-reliant, but also to be making like joined up decisions where you can, broadly speaking, trust the twig decisions they're making without you hearing about it, or the branch decisions for that matter, are pretty aligned with what you would do if you were there anyway.
Yeah. Well, it won't surprise you that there is no single easy hack just to make that
Oh, you
happen.
disappoint me. You
I know
disappoint me.
that is the act and the art of leadership, which is
Yeah.
how do I bring out the best in my people? And the twin DNA of a successful organization is culture and strategy. And strategy, well, you will have the best. I can't remember what your definition of strategy is, but I agree with it. But effectively, it's like what are the hard? I think of it as what are the hard choices we're making that will enable our
Mm.
company to be successful.
Sure.
And culture is how do I get the best people bringing their best to work on the stuff that matters. And great companies have both of those things. They have a strategy that says, look, this is the choice we're making. These are the investments we're having. This is what we're saying no to, which is, for me, so often the great undone thing in strategy, which is not having the courage to say no to a bunch of things that you kind of want to do. And this is how we'll be different and this is how we'll be profitable in the marketplace. And then your culture is like, so how do I get great people to be working on this stuff? And part of it is, do people actually know what is important and what they should be working on? Do they have a line of sight to those kind of core decisions that you're making? Is there structure in terms of values or whatever you want to call them in terms of this is how we work around here? This is kind of the way we implement that. And then part of it is, how do I enable people to learn and get smarter and make progress? And it turns out that coaching is one of the best ways to help people learn and get smart and take responsibility and make progress, in part because the act of coaching is one of the best ways to train leaders out of micromanaging. Because, leaders love to micromanage. I've got a TEDx talk out there called Taming Your Advice Monster, and everybody knows their advice monster. As soon as something starts happening, their advice monster kind of looms up out of the darkness and goes, oh, I'm going to add some serious value to this thing. I can't wait for you to stop talking because I already know what I want to tell you. And it is difficult because, the jargon for this is empowerment. You're going to empower your people. And there are very few people in the world who are kind of overtly anti-empowerment. I'm against empowerment, but in the moment, empowerment means giving up some of your power and giving it to that other person. And in the moment, that's hard because there's a lowering of status and a lowering of certainty and a rise of ambiguity. But this is what it means. So you need to figure out the parameters to that. And, a really good rule of thumb on the parameters around what you can trust people to do is to say, look, 2 types of mistakes. This comes from a writer called Mike Abrashoff, I think his name is. He was a U.S. Navy captain 400 years ago, 30 years ago, and he's kind of he wrote one good book and he's been rocking that book ever since. But here's his core idea. There are above the waterline mistakes and below the waterline mistakes. And your job is to try and get clear on what above the waterline mistakes you can allow, because that is part of progress and that is learning and that is how people get smarter, by screwing up. And you need to avoid below the waterline mistakes because that sinks your company. And so you need to kind of create those parameters to say, right, I'm empowering you, I'm getting you to do stuff. Here's the lines. Here's how I support you. Here's how I've got the wind at your back. Here's when I want you to come and talk to me when you've got this type of decision being faced. Here's the tree, the trunk, the branches, and the like, so we know what decisions I'm allowing you to do, and you know when you need to come to me to talk stuff through. And you set that up as best you can. And it's hard and it's complicated.
That's great. And look, I mean, when we loop around all of this stuff, to me the pattern is pretty clear, and it goes back to what we were talking about with the telling people what to do thing.
Yeah.
At the highest level, when you have strategy, you create the frame within which people are operating.
Yeah.
You create the yeses and the nos and the sense of like this direction, not that direction. Once you've got that frame, what people do within that frame, fundamentally, you can and should give them a huge amount of freedom there, because if the frame's been set well,
Right.
and they adhere to it, they're going to be right more often than they're going to be wrong.
And you allow for emergence to happen, which is like you figure some stuff out within the frame. Because if you think I've got the frame and now I'm going to map out what the 3-year journey is going to be, you're wrong. Like you're basically wrong about 3 steps into the 3-year journey. So part of it is learning to loosen the hunger we all have for certainty, which is like, okay, great, we've got a 9-step plan to get us to 2030. And I'm like, useful to have a milestone, a kind of a mountain on the horizon that you're aiming for. But this is not Google Maps. You can't just type in the thing and go, great, it's like a 27-minute journey and here's the coffee shop on the way. It's more like there's a misty valley and you're learning to orienteer, and you need to move to the next thing and then reorient and remap and then move to the next thing and then reorient and move to the map. And it might not even be the right mountain in the end that you're aiming for, but it is an exploration and an emergence into what works, whilst you're balancing out the need to kind of exploit what is working and what has proven to be profitable.
God, that is so good. That is so good. That's spot on. I mean, the example that I often think about or reference is when you think about like why most people, looking for a job, people aspire to work for a company like, SpaceX or Red Bull or one of these sexy companies that everybody talks about. And you think you got to pause and think, other than the fact that we've heard of them and whatever, why do people think it would be good to work for these companies? And I think that what those companies give you, even if you've never worked for a company like that, you sort of understand the strategic frame, the big picture strategic frame, so clearly that they've created this amazing sandbox for employees to essentially sort of play within and perform these emergent properties. So I've never worked for Red Bull, and I've never had Red Bull as a client, etc., etc. And yet I feel like I could just be plopped in there and I would get the gist, and then I'd be playing their tune. And that, to the extent that people want to be told what to do versus given freedom, that is the extent of it. You want to be in that place that gives you that sort of strategic safety, if we can call it that.
Yeah.
But then within that, you feel that you can really kind of like flourish and be yourself.
And you don't have to figure this out by yourself if you're this leader. One of the ways you figure this out is you go, okay, Alex, this is the thing, this is the plan, this is the ask I have of you. How can I best support you in this? What do you want from me as your boss? And they'll go, look, this is what I need or want from you. And then, of course, you get to say yes or no or maybe or kind of come back to that. This is that adult-to-adult relationship. Ask for what you want, knowing that the answer might be no, and negotiate the difference. What do you want is one of the 7 questions in the Coaching Habit book. So you don't have to apply the same solution and formula to everybody. What's useful is to say, great, how do I work best with you? What support do you want most? One of my other books is called How to Work with Almost Anyone. And the key idea in that book is who and how we work with somebody is a greater impact on the happiness and the success of our lives than what we're working on. And you probably know this to be true because think of some of the best work you've done, or your fondest memories of work. And it was more about the people around you than it was the actual work that you're doing. And when you think about the suckiest moments in your work life, you could be working on a really cool project, but if you had a boss that sucked, that the experience sucked. And the key tactic in How to Work with Almost Anyone is to have a keystone conversation, a conversation about how we're going to work together, not what we're going to work on. And in most organizations and most moments, everyone's like, let's crack on with the work. I can't wait. It's exciting. It's urgent. It's a crisis. And you just assume that the human stuff will work itself out. And, it always goes off the rails to a lesser or greater extent. And a conversation about, what are your strengths? What how do you employ? What are your processes? How do you like to work? What defines a good working relationship? What defines a bad working relationship? How will we fix it when stuff actually goes wrong? Those 5 core questions set you up for a more successful working relationship with somebody.
Quickly, if you're enjoying this and you want to get the full thinking blueprint that sits under basically all of these ideas, then you're going to want to grab a copy of my book, No Bullshit Strategy. I'd like to say that you can pick it up wherever you get your books, but let's be real, you're probably just going to go to Amazon, and that is all fine because it is on there too, obviously. 2 of my favourite reviews are one where a professor from USC said that she'd made it required reading for all of her students, quite right too, and another where a guy called it a spiritual masterpiece masquerading as a book on strategy. Now that is obviously the kind of praise I'm here for, so if you're curious what the hell he was on about, then go and check it out. So look, Michael, obviously you know a hell of a lot about these principles and coaching. Although that being said, so do a lot of other people as well. But a lot of other people do not have anywhere near the success or impact that you have had on their industry. So shifting gears a little bit to your own story and the things that have really gotten you to where you are. I mean, if you look back on this journey to becoming one of the most influential people in the world in your field, is there a particular moment that you can point to where you can say that was the breakthrough moment? That's where I went from being a kind of normie coach or coach adjacent person, so to speak, to being the Crown Prince MBS.
Look, there's a few moments that were the breakthrough moments. But the principles of what made them breakthrough moments played out kind of throughout. So the key breakthrough moment in some ways was I'd had this idea for this book on coaching. I'd been teaching this in organizations for 5 years, so I kind of really refined my ideas around it. It was really polished. I knew there was a market for this. And I already published a book with a New York publisher called Workman. And the book was called Do More Great Work. It's about how do you find the work that lights you up and makes a difference. And it had done okay. I mean, more than okay. It sold like 80,000 copies, which was like it's a solid B-list book. So I took the idea of the book to them, and they're like, okay, show us. And so I wrote a version of the book, and they went, well, we hate that, so try again. And then I wrote another one, and they're like, we're still not keen, but try again. And I did it 6 times. On the 7th time, I was pretty down, and I was, but I had some thinking about it. I was like, I'm sure this is the form that this book should have. So I took it to them, and I went, look, no more. Go away and try again. It's either a yes or a no, because this is it. And honestly, I was pretty sure they're going to say yes, because you bet on the person, not on the product. And I had a story about why this is going to work. They said no. And I was gutted. I was really gutted, and I was surprised. And I spent a bit of time licking my wounds. But then I went, this is good, and I'm going to self-publish this. I'm going to back myself on that. So I set myself the standard that I'm going to self-publish it in a way that will make it impossible for somebody to know that this was self-published. So I'm going to show up as a professional. I'm going to invest in a designer, invest in an editor, invest in a copy editor, and I'm going to market the book for 2 years. And that's what I did with the coaching habit, and it took off. Now, it took off because it was the right book at the right moment, and it got a little hefty sprinkle of fairy dust, and that kind of gave it the ability to kind of escape the gravity that most books have, which is to launch and then mostly disappear without trace. But the key principle was to bet on myself, understanding what was at risk, understanding that if this failed, I was going to be egotistically and financially and basically reputationally okay. Because, when you make a gamble, you're risking your reputation, you're risking money, you're risking time, and maybe you're risking sort of physical danger. Well, there's no danger in writing a book. I had the money to cover this. And in terms of time, I'm like, this is the best project that I can think of that I should be doing right now. And in terms of reputation, you know that saying, I used to worry what people thought of me, and then I realized nobody thought of me. So I don't, it's like my reputation is like not that great big a deal. So I was like, this is worth it. And that's a recurring pattern. I've done that a lot. Most of what happens when I make those bets is they don't really work. They're small wins or they're small failures. I've had one really, really big win, which is the coaching habit. 1.5 million copies sold. I've had a couple of big-ish wins, like the Advice Trap and Do More Great Work. Over 100,000 copies sold for those two books. I've written 6 or 7 other books that have sold somewhere between 10 and 50,000 copies. So they're really small wins, or in some cases, actual losses. So it's kind of it's not that I know much about the world of venture capitalism, but it's a bit like venture capital, which is like you make bets, you understand what's at risk, you be persistent, you develop what's different. Like I've spent 30 years developing my voice and developing my style and developing what I'm good at. And, you know, to use Jim Collins, I've spent a lot of time firing bullets and then firing the occasional cannonball around the stuff that I think is worth going for. And so it's more of a longer term play and philosophy that I think has helped me break through. And then just the actual breakthrough, it's just a shed load of luck, which is what you need to really break through, which is you just get that lucky break where you do all the hard work, you do all the smart thinking, and you get that wind in the sails at the right moment.
Yeah, I mean, like you're talking to a guy here who basically would be nowhere if he hadn't just accidentally gone viral on LinkedIn one day. I mean, what that moment was the sliding doors moment. And if I'd put the same post out 2 hours earlier in the day, the whole pitch is different. But what you pick up on there, I think that it's a really misunderstood point, because something that people love to say, people love to sort of valorize courage and risk taking, and all of these things are good. And in the world of strategy, people are like, oh yeah, you know, it's all about like, it's all about like courage and risk. And I get people like strategy type people sending me messages, say things like, how do you make the client comfortable with, like, you know, taking the risk and so on. And I reflected on it, and I'm like, I'm not sure that you're thinking about this the right way, because yes, you do need to have courage in a sense of proactivity to actually go out there and like do stuff. But really, other than in very unusual circumstances, you should never be doing anything where the consequence of failure is that your whole company is going to burn down. Right. Now and again, there are historically great moments where companies have done something like that. But normally, it's much more like what you described with the book, where you're doing something with huge upside, a high likelihood of failure, but so it is a risk in that sense. But ultimately, there's nothing to really be afraid of, right? Because like the worst case scenario is that nothing happens. So
exactly,
and that's all. That's always the case.
Mostly like, because I ended up working with a company called Page Two, so hybrid publishing, and like it basically, for me to put a book out in the world, cost me about $50,000, and a year of my life in terms of writing it. And I can afford to lose $50,000 typically on the back of a book. And I've also figured out, if I sell some keynote speeches based on the book, that alone covers it and pays for it.
Yep.
There's just much less at risk. So there's this degree of, you know, Seth Godin's got a great phrase, which is like, you got to ship it. You keep taking your best guess. I love that phrase. Take your best guess, ship it, invest in it for a while, and then go, I've done my work. It's out in the world. It worked. It didn't work. I'm on to the next project.
But I've got to know, though, because, you know, reading the book, I'd read the book long before I ever met you, actually, and it's easy to say with hindsight, but back when I read it, I didn't know that it was this big selling book. It was just a random thing someone recommended to me. It could have been a small book, but to me, it was self-evidently the way that you've structured it and the and as a package, self-evidently as a package, it was a good package. I find it extremely hard to understand how somebody in publishing could have looked at that and said that it wasn't a good package. What was it? What was their problem with it, and what was it about it that made you think, no? I think this will work.
It's hard to say. I mean, history is full of people making terrible decisions that in hindsight look like idiots. Like, no, I'm not going to sign the Beatles guitar music on the way out. The classic. Because Workman turned me down, and you could make an argument that they're like, it's a business book that's not actually our strength as a publishing thing. So maybe it was more at a, does it fit with our portfolio level? They never really told me why it was a no. But I did have a conversation with the American AMA, American Marketing Association, going, hey, would you be interested in this book? And the guy who read it went like, this is a terrible book. You need to completely rewrite this. This will never sell. And I was like, what? I know. It was such a clarifying moment because I'm like, oh, you are so wrong. Like, I know this book is going to sell some copies, and your vision for a book is a terrible vision. But publishing is a business that mostly is not very good at a bunch of things.
I mean, I guess I think I probably feel that way because there's a lot of sort of stylistic or structural similarities with my book, which was also self-published. And one of the things that I can't stand, that I detest with a passion about non-fiction books and certainly business books, is they have a hell of a lot of filler. They have so much filler them that they must be. I can't believe that the authors want to waste their time writing all this filler. So I can only assume they're encouraged to do so.
They are.
They don't.
Like, we're hiring you to write a 60,000 word book. That's what the publishers do, as opposed to we're hiring you to write a really good book. And for me, I'm like, what's the shortest book you can write that is still useful?
Yes.
Because every single word you add is one more reason for a person not to read your book.
Exactly. People have said to me, and I'm sure that they've said exactly the same thing to you, that like there's not a sentence wasted in this book.
Right.
But then you'll go read another nominal, practical, businessy type book, and there'll be a case study that they spend 40 pages describing the background of the executives and the company, all to land a point which could have been one sentence. And I was listening to the book. I don't know. I would love to have him on the podcast. So I probably shouldn't slag it off, but whatever. It makes for better content. I was interested in that book, 10x is Better Than 2x by Dan Sullivan. Yeah. I thought that the subject matter of the book and the wisdom of the book was 10 out of 10. But I have never disliked a book more in my life.
Totally feel the same.
I could not stand it as a book. I was listening to it as an audiobook. I was driving along in the car and I was screaming at it.
Yeah.
Get to the point. Get to the point.
So to be fair, he co-authored that with Ben somebody or other, and it's mostly Dan Sullivan's the secondary author to that. The other guy's the primary author. Well, look, we're talking about why most business books are terrible, and I agree that most business books are terrible. And why our books are amazing, because we are amazing.
Exactly.
but they're good because they've got an opinion, they've got a voice, a distinctive personality. You read my book and you get a sense of who I am. You read your book, you get a sense of who you are. It's generous to the reader, which is like, I'm not going to waste your time. I'm going to make this as useful, and I'm going to help you get to the end of this book, because I know that we've all been trained out of reading books now. So you're looking for an excuse to put this book down. So I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you get to the end of this book as best I can. And both of our books are recommendable to others. Like, I just had my niece here from Australia doing an internship for a month, and yours was one of the 2 books I got her to read, because I want you to learn about marketing, I want you to learn about strategy. Here are the 2 books.
Wow, very
read them. And yours is one of those. And so take this as a metaphor in general for stuff, not just books, but like too many books are about, this is for me, the author, let me show you how smart I am, rather than who am I writing this for, and how can I be most helpful for that person to solve a particular problem?
Yeah. It's just surprising how easy it is to drift from that core
Right.
mission.
Right, exactly.
To close things out, maybe in your world you haven't sensed this, I don't know, but things feel to be in a pretty significant state of churn and flux right now. People are
No,
quite...
I haven't noticed any of that. Why?
Oh,
What's
good.
happening?
I'm glad. It all is well in the world of coaching. With everything that's gone on in, let's say, the last 6-12 months, and the way that the ground is moving under our feet, are there any particular changes, either changes in your business and how you're approaching things, or even changes in your opinions about things that have happened as a result of this? Because a lot of sort of stuff that was working a couple of years ago is not working any longer.
Well, I mean, in my world, AI is a pretty, beware of living in interesting times type of development.
Yes.
Because AI does a pretty good job at coaching. So both at an individual level and an organizational level, organizations are throwing lots of money towards AI, and AI training is a subset of that, which means that they're thinking about, we don't need to invest in leadership anymore. We'll just have the agents do all the work. And in the world of coaching as well, there's like, how do you be a coach now, when actually I can sit down and go back and forward with Claude or whoever else, and I'm going to get some pretty good development and thinking in the way that I work. So I think it's interesting to go, well, what do you do as a leader now? Particularly when you're like, my answers are less relevant than they have ever been, because you know, one of the lines in the book is that your advice is not nearly as good as you think it is, and I think that's only 10x, not just 2x, it's 10x in terms of the relevance of that insight. So what do you do as a leader? Well, I think part of what you're bringing is connection. Because I think AI often means people kind of cocoon a little bit. They kind of like, it's just me and my computer and my agents. So you need to connect both in terms of with people, but also the bigger picture. In some ways, that's context. You've got to be providing context over content. AI, great at content, but can they provide the context that you can provide? I think there's it comes back a little bit to a word we used before, which is also around how do you provide and gift people with courage? Because in organizational life and life in general, it's easy just to kind of give up being an adult, play by the rules, have people tell you what to do. And to have the courage to make your own decisions, to find your own way, to stand for something is significant. So I think, part of them, like, how do we keep this act of human leadership alive when it feels like a lot of it's becoming AI agenticized?
Yeah, and I feel that one thing with that people don't really seem to like grapple with is that the strength, but also the massive weakness of AI is essentially is basically how cheap it is. Because if you're asking a closed question where there's one answer, what's 2 + 2 = 4, and if AI can answer your closed question, then you should do it. Why shouldn't you? Yeah. But most of the questions...
I already know 2 + 2 = 4, so I don't go to AI for that, but I get what you might be struggling with basic math. Yeah.
I speak for myself then. But most of the questions leaders are grappling with are obviously not closed questions. They're open questions where there are 100 different equally legitimate answers. And the problem with, you can think, I'll sit down and I'll get AI to help me, to coach me, and it will give like piece of advice A. And you think, that's a good piece of advice. But of course, what you're not factoring in is that it could have equally given you pieces of advice B to Z. And you could prompt it to give you any of those pieces of advices. And it's so articulate that it will argue very convincingly for all of these 26 pieces of advice. And where that leaves you fundamentally is back right where you started, because like this thing can tell me anything and it can convince me of anything.
Yeah.
And therefore, where is the value in any of this? Because I'm still left back at square one, where the only person who can choose between options 1 to 26 is me. So
Exactly.
in a weird way, the AI is taking me 360 and just loop me back to the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about the difference between clarity and certainty. AI really good at certainty. And as you said, it can be really clear and persuasive and extraordinary, really, about 1 through 26 in terms of options. Clarity is kind of like, I'm clear what matters. I'm clear what the choice is. I've got the courage to make that choice.
And I guess so much of that clarity, it comes down to these irreducible factors like values, context, what day of the week it is, that the soup that goes into clarity is not something that you can program into a prompt.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Mate, this has been an absolute pleasure. Great stuff. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, of course. It's been great.
Thanks a lot for listening. If you want to keep expanding the way that you think and the results that you get, then make sure you hit subscribe here. And also check out basicarts.org/raremind, where you can subscribe to my Substack, which features deep essays on these topics, deep practical essays, and fundamentally is all about how businesses can win in this crazy post-AI